The year is 73 BC. In the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, in the gladiatorial school of Lentulus Batiatus in Capua, a Thracian warrior named Spartacus stares through iron bars at the training yard below. His calloused hands grip the cold metal as he watches his fellow gladiators practice their deadly choreography. But this is no ordinary training session. It's a rehearsal for rebellion. Spartacus was not born into slavery. Once he had been a free man, a warrior from the mountainous regions of Thrace, in what is now Bulgaria. Roman historians tell us little about his early life, but we know he served as a soldier, possibly even fighting alongside Roman legions before circumstances turned him into their enemy. Whether captured in battle or condemned for desertion, Spartacus found himself stripped of his freedom and sold into the brutal world of gladiatorial combat. The gladiatorial schools were factories of death and entertainment, owned by wealthy Romans called Lanistae. These institutions trained slaves to fight and die for the amusement of the masses. Spartacus was purchased by Lentulus Batiatus, whose school in Capua was renowned for producing skilled fighters. The conditions were harsh beyond imagination. Gladiators were kept in underground cells, fed barely enough to maintain their strength, and subjected to rigorous training that often proved fatal. But Spartacus possessed something that set him apart from his fellow gladiators: natural leadership and an unbreakable spirit. Standing tall and powerfully built, with piercing eyes that seemed to see through the facade of Roman civilization, he quickly gained the respect of his fellow slaves. Among them were men from across the Roman world: Gauls, Germans, Thracians, and others who had been torn from their homelands and forced into this hellish existence. The breaking point came in the spring of 73 BC. Roman sources suggest that Spartacus and his closest allies, including the fierce Gallic warriors Crixus and Enomas, had been planning their escape for months. The spark that ignited the rebellion was typically Roman in its casual cruelty. Batiatus had decided to stage a particularly brutal series of games, knowing that many of his gladiators would not survive. On the appointed night, Spartacus moved with the precision of a military commander. He and approximately 70 fellow gladiators overwhelmed their guards, seizing knives from the kitchen and weapons from the training grounds. The revolt began not with grand speeches or elaborate plans, but with desperate men fighting for their lives in the darkness of their prison. What happened next transformed a slave revolt into a legend that would terrify Rome for generations. Instead of fleeing immediately, Spartacus made a crucial decision that revealed his strategic genius. He led his followers to nearby estates, liberating field slaves and recruiting them to his cause. Word spread like wildfire through the countryside. A gladiator army was forming, and they were winning. The Roman authorities initially dismissed the uprising as a minor disturbance. They dispatched Claudius Glaber, a praetor, with a force of about 3,000 men to crush what they assumed would be a disorganized rabble. This arrogance would prove to be Rome's first mistake. Spartacus had chosen his base wisely. The slopes of Mount Vesuvius provided natural fortification and multiple escape routes. When Glaber's forces arrived and attempted to besiege the gladiators, Spartacus revealed his military brilliance. Instead of waiting to be starved out, he ordered his men to weave ropes from wild vines growing on the mountainside. Under cover of darkness, they rappelled down the seemingly impassable cliffs behind the Roman camp and launched a surprise attack. The Romans, caught completely off guard, were routed. Spartacus had won his first victory against the masters of the known world. The victory at Vesuvius was more than a military triumph. It was a symbol that the impossible could be achieved. Slaves throughout southern Italy began to flock to Spartacus's banner. His army swelled from hundreds to thousands, then to tens of thousands. They were not just gladiators now, but field hands, household servants, miners, and craftsmen, all united by their shared oppression and their hope for freedom. Spartacus proved to be more than just a skilled fighter. He was a natural leader who understood both the hearts of his followers and the minds of his enemies. He organized his diverse army into military units, appointed trusted lieutenants, and established a mobile camp that could move quickly across the Italian countryside. Unlike typical slave revolts, which were usually chaotic and short-lived, Spartacus's rebellion took on the characteristics of a professional military campaign. The Romans, now thoroughly alarmed, sent another force under Publius Varinius. But Spartacus had learned from his enemy's tactics and adapted them to his own purposes. His army moved with the speed of nomads and struck with the precision of Roman legions. They defeated Varinius's forces in a series of engagements, capturing weapons, armor, and supplies that transformed the slave army into a formidable fighting force. By 72 BCE, Spartacus commanded an army estimated at 70,000 followers. They had become the masters of much of southern Italy, moving freely through regions that had been under Roman control for centuries. The rebellion had evolved into something unprecedented in Roman history, a genuine threat to the stability of the Republic itself. But success brought new challenges. Spartacus's army was not a unified force but a coalition of different peoples with different goals. Crixus and many of the Gallic and Germanic followers wanted to remain in Italy, raiding and plundering Roman territories. Spartacus, however, had a grander vision. He wanted to lead his people across the Alps to freedom, back to their homelands where they could live as free men. The division came to a head when Crixus broke away with approximately 30,000 followers, choosing to continue raiding in southern Italy. Spartacus, perhaps recognizing that his coalition was too fragile to maintain indefinitely, continued north with his remaining forces. The split would prove costly. Crixus and his followers were eventually trapped and destroyed by Roman forces under Marcus Licinius Crassus. Spartacus, meanwhile, had reached the foothills of the Alps. Freedom lay just beyond the mountains, the lands of his birth, where Roman authority was weak and his followers could scatter to their homes. But fate, or perhaps the psychology of his followers, intervened. Instead of crossing to freedom, the army turned back toward Rome. Why they made this fateful decision remains one of history's great mysteries. Perhaps they were unwilling to leave Italy without striking a final blow against their oppressors. Perhaps they believed their success made them invincible. The Roman Senate, faced with the unprecedented threat of a slave army marching toward the capital, took extraordinary measures. They granted unlimited authority to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest and most ambitious men. Crassus assembled 8 legions, nearly 50,000 professional soldiers, and set out to end the rebellion once and for all. The final campaign was a masterclass in Roman military methodology. Crassus understood that he faced no ordinary enemy. Spartacus had proven himself capable of outmaneuvering Roman generals and defeating Roman armies. The only way to defeat him was to remove his greatest advantage, mobility. Crassus began a systematic campaign to corner the slave army, using Rome's superior resources and organization to gradually restrict Spartacus's options. The end came in 71 BCE in the mountains of southern Italy. Spartacus, recognizing that his strategic position was deteriorating, attempted to negotiate with Cilician pirates to transport his army to Sicily, where they could establish a new base of operations. But the pirates, perhaps bought off by Roman gold, betrayed him and sailed away with his payment. Trapped between Crassus's legions and the sea, Spartacus made his final stand. According to Roman historians, he tried to reach Crassus himself in the final battle, fighting his way through the Roman lines with desperate courage. But the gladiator general was struck down before he could reach his enemy. His body was never found among the thousands of dead, leading some to believe he had escaped. But the rebellion died with him. The aftermath was characteristically Roman in its calculated cruelty. Crassus crucified 6,000 captured rebels along the Appian Way, the road leading from Rome to Capua. For miles, travelers could see the bodies of those who had dared to dream of freedom, a grim reminder of the price of challenging Roman authority. But Spartacus's legacy extended far beyond his death. His rebellion had shaken the Roman Republic to its foundations and exposed the inherent instability of a society built on massive slave labor. The very fact that a gladiator from Thrace could unite diverse peoples and threaten Rome itself became a source of inspiration for future generations. Writers and historians would remember him not as a criminal or terrorist, but as a man who fought for the most fundamental human right, freedom. The rebellion also had profound political consequences for Rome. Crassus's victory made him one of the most powerful men in the Republic, setting the stage for his later alliance with Julius Caesar and Pompey in the First Triumvirate. The fear of future slave revolts influenced Roman policy for generations, leading to both harsher controls on slaves and more careful management of gladiatorial games. More than 2 millennia later, Spartacus remains a powerful symbol of resistance against oppression. His story has inspired countless revolts, revolutions, and liberation movements, from the slaves of Haiti to the workers of the Industrial Revolution, from the fighters of the Warsaw Ghetto to the civil rights activists of the American South. People have drawn courage from the example of the Thracian gladiator who dared to challenge the mightiest empire of his time. The man who began as a slave in a gladiatorial school had become something far greater, a symbol of the unquenchable human desire for freedom and dignity. In the end, Spartacus achieved a different kind of immortality than the gladiators who died for entertainment in Roman arenas. He became a legend that would outlive the empire that killed him, a reminder that even the mightiest powers can be challenged by those who refuse to accept their fate. In the mists of a cold February morning in 1194, the people of Chartres awoke to a scene of devastation that would have broken lesser spirits. Their beloved cathedral, the spiritual heart of their city, lay in smoking ruins. Lightning had struck the night before, and the ancient Romanesque structure had been consumed by flames. But as the citizens gathered in the town square, something extraordinary happened. Instead of despair, they found determination. Within hours, they had made a decision that would create one of the most magnificent buildings in human history, the Gothic cathedral that still stands today. This was not just about rebuilding a church. It was about reaching toward heaven itself through stone and glass, light and shadow. The Gothic age had begun, and with it a revolution in architecture that would transform the skyline of medieval Europe forever. The story of Gothic cathedral building is inseparable from the story of the master builders who made it possible. These were not merely skilled craftsmen but visionaries who combined engineering genius with artistic brilliance. They were the unsung heroes of the medieval world, men whose names are often lost to history but whose achievements still inspire wonder 8 centuries later. At Chartres, the reconstruction began under the guidance of a master builder whose name history has not preserved, but whose genius speaks through every stone. Like all medieval master builders, he was part architect, part engineer, part artist, and part manager. He would have begun his career as a young apprentice, learning the secrets of stone and mortar, timber and iron. Through decades of hard work and careful study, he would have mastered not just the practical skills of construction, but the mathematical principles that made Gothic architecture possible. The Gothic style had emerged in the 12th century, born from a revolution in engineering that solved problems that had limited builders for centuries. The key innovation was the pointed arch, borrowed from Islamic architecture and perfected by European craftsmen. Unlike the rounded Roman arch, which exerted tremendous outward pressure on supporting walls, the pointed arch directed weight downward, allowing builders to create structures of unprecedented height and lightness. But the pointed arch was just the beginning. Gothic builders developed an entire system of innovations that worked together: flying buttresses that supported thin walls from the outside, ribbed vaults that distributed weight more efficiently, and larger windows that filled interiors with light. These technical advances were not mere engineering solutions but artistic choices that reflected a new understanding of sacred space. The master builder at Chartres inherited a partially completed structure and a community determined to create something magnificent. The foundation stones and the western façade had survived the fire, providing both practical constraints and artistic opportunities. He would have stood among the ruins, visualizing the cathedral that would rise from this devastation, calculating loads and stresses, planning the intricate sequence of construction that would take decades to complete. Medieval cathedral building was a community enterprise unlike anything in the modern world. The master builder worked closely with the bishop and chapter, but also with the guilds of craftsmen, the merchants who provided materials, and the ordinary citizens who contributed labor and funds. The project at Chartres was financed through a remarkable combination of noble donations, merchant contributions, and popular enthusiasm. People from all walks of life participated, from knights who donated stone from their quarries to peasants who hauled materials in their carts. The construction process began with the careful laying of foundations, massive stone structures that would support the enormous weight of the cathedral. Medieval builders understood that the foundation was literally the cornerstone of their enterprise. They dug deep into the earth, sometimes hitting bedrock, sometimes building on carefully prepared stone platforms. The foundation work at Chartres took years, invisible labor, that would ensure the cathedral's stability for centuries to come. As the walls began to rise, the master builder faced countless technical challenges. Each stone had to be cut to precise specifications, fitted perfectly into place, and secured with mortar that would harden into a bond stronger than the stone itself. The masons who did this work were highly skilled craftsmen who had served long apprenticeships learning their trade. They worked with simple tools, chisels, hammers, measuring devices, but their precision was remarkable. The construction of the vaults presented the greatest engineering challenge. These soaring stone ceilings, some reaching 120 feet above the floor, had to be built without modern machinery or materials. The master builder used a system of wooden scaffolding and stone centering that allowed masons to work at dangerous heights, fitting together the complex geometry of ribs and wedge stones that created the vault structure. The flying buttresses that supported the walls were marvels of engineering ingenuity. These stone arches, springing from external piers, transferred the outward thrust of the vaults safely to the ground. They allowed the walls to be opened up for the huge windows that became the glory of Gothic architecture. The master builder at Chartres designed a system of buttresses that was both structurally sound and aesthetically magnificent, creating a forest of stone that seemed to float around the cathedral's exterior. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Gothic cathedral building was the creation of stained glass windows. These were not merely decorative elements, but integral parts of the building's structure and meaning. The master glaziers who created the windows at Chartres worked in collaboration with the master builder, designing openings that would support the massive weight of stone tracery while allowing maximum light to enter the interior. The process of creating stained glass was both art and science. Glaziers mixed sand, ash, and metallic oxides at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, creating colored glass of extraordinary brilliance. They cut the glass into shapes following detailed cartoons, then assembled the pieces using lead cane and iron supports. The result was windows that transformed sunlight into divine illumination, creating an interior space that seemed to glow with heavenly light. The master builder coordinated not just the physical construction, but the symbolic program of the cathedral. Every sculpture, every window, every architectural detail was part of a vast theological narrative that told the story of salvation. The western façade at Chartres, with its 3 portals dedicated to the life of Christ, was designed to be read like a book by a largely literate population. The master builder worked with theologians and artists to ensure that the cathedral's message was both doctrinally correct and visually compelling. The construction of a Gothic cathedral was a multi-generational undertaking. The master builder who began the work at Chartres in 1194 would not live to see its completion. His successors inherited not just his plans but his vision, continuing the work with remarkable consistency of purpose. This continuity was maintained through the Lodge, a semi-secret organization of skilled craftsmen who preserved the technical knowledge and artistic traditions of Gothic building. The lodge system was unique to medieval cathedral building. Master builders, masons, carpenters, and other craftsmen formed tight-knit communities that traveled from project to project across Europe. They shared trade secrets, maintained quality standards, and preserved the sophisticated mathematical knowledge that made Gothic architecture possible. The lodge at Chartres would have included men from across France and beyond, united by their commitment to creating something greater than themselves. The cathedral's construction required an enormous quantity of materials. Stone was quarried from sites carefully chosen for their quality and accessibility. The limestone used at Chartres came from quarries near Berkers, transported by ox cart over rough medieval roads. Timber for scaffolding and roof structures came from forests that were managed specifically for cathedral building. Iron for reinforcement and tools was smelted in forges that operated around the clock during the construction season. The seasonal rhythm of medieval building was dictated by weather and agricultural cycles. Major construction took place during the warmer months when mortar would cure properly and workers could labor safely at heights. Winter was a time for preparing materials, cutting stone, and planning the next season's work. The master builder had to coordinate these cycles with the availability of skilled labor and the flow of funds from the cathedral's supporters. The human cost of cathedral building was enormous. Workers faced constant danger from falling stones, collapsing scaffolding, and the sheer height of the structures they were creating. Many masons suffered from respiratory diseases caused by stone dust, and accidents were common. Yet the work continued, driven by a combination of religious devotion, professional pride, and economic necessity. The completion of Chartres Cathedral in the 1250s marked the culmination of one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. The building that rose from the ashes of the fire was unlike anything the world had seen before. Its soaring interior space, filled with colored light from the magnificent windows, created an environment that seemed to lift the soul toward heaven. The technical innovations developed during its construction would influence builders across Europe for centuries to come. But perhaps the greatest achievement of the Gothic master builders was not technical but spiritual. They had created spaces that embodied the medieval Christian vision of the cosmos, structures that served as bridges between the earthly and the divine. The cathedral at Chartres, with its perfect proportions and luminous interior, became a model for Gothic builders throughout Europe. The legacy of the Gothic master builders extends far beyond the medieval period. Their innovations in structural engineering, their understanding of light and space, and their integration of architecture with the other arts continue to influence builders today. The skyscrapers of modern cities, with their steel frames and glass curtain walls, owe much to the Gothic builders who first understood how to create soaring structures that were both strong and beautiful. The master builders of the Gothic age were more than craftsmen. They were visionaries who transformed stone and glass into poetry, who created spaces that still inspire wonder and devotion 8 centuries after their completion. In an age when most people lived in crude huts and worked with simple tools, these men achieved something miraculous. They built structures that seemed to reach toward heaven itself, monuments to human creativity and divine inspiration that continue to move and inspire us today. The canvas wagon cover flapped in the prairie wind as Sarah Mitchell looked back one last time at the Missouri River. It was May 15, 1847, and her family was about to embark on a journey that would test every fiber of their being. Behind them lay the familiar world of farms and towns, of neighbors and kinfolk, of everything they had ever known. Ahead stretched 2,000 miles of wilderness, mountain ranges that scraped the sky, and a dream of a new life in the Oregon Territory. Sarah's husband, John, cracked the whip over their team of oxen, and the wagon lurched forward. Their 3 children, Mary aged 12, Samuel 10, and little Emma, just 6, pressed their faces against the canvas, watching the civilization they knew fade into the distance. They were part of a train of 37 wagons, carrying nearly 200 souls toward an uncertain destiny in the American West. The Oregon Trail was more than a road. It was a river of humanity flowing westward, carrying dreams and desperation, hope and heartbreak across the continent. For the Mitchell family, like thousands of others, the decision to leave everything behind had not been made lightly. The economic depression of the 1840s had made farming increasingly difficult in Missouri. Stories of Oregon's fertile valleys, where land was free and the climate mild, had stirred imaginations across the Midwest. But more than economic opportunity, the West represented something deeper, the quintessentially American belief that a family could start over, could build a better life through courage and hard work. John Mitchell had been a successful farmer in Missouri, but the bank failures of 1837 had left him deeply in debt. He was a man of 42, weathered by years of hard labor, with calloused hands and eyes that had seen both prosperity and loss. Sarah, at 38, had married young and spent her adult life managing a household, raising children, and supporting her husband through good times and bad. She was practical, resilient, and deeply religious, qualities that would prove essential in the months ahead. The preparations for the journey had taken months. John had sold their farm for far less than it was worth, keeping only enough to buy a wagon, supplies, and oxen. The wagon, a sturdy Conestoga design, was their home warehouse and lifeline all in one. It carried everything they would need for the 6-month journey: food, tools, clothing, medicine, and the few precious possessions they couldn't bear to leave behind. The weight restrictions were brutal. Each family could carry only about 2,000 pounds, and every ounce had to be carefully considered. Sarah had agonized over what to take and what to leave. Her mother's china had to stay behind, as did John's beloved books and most of their furniture. What they carried was practical above all: flour, bacon, beans, coffee, sugar, and salt, tools for repairing the wagon, medicine for treating illness, and warm clothing for the mountain crossings. The wagon train was led by Captain James Morrison, a former mountain man who had made the journey 3 times before. Morrison was a tough, laconic man who understood that his decisions would mean the difference between life and death for the families under his protection. He had seen the best and worst of human nature on the trail, and he knew that the journey would test every family to their limits. The first weeks were deceptively easy. The prairie rolled endlessly ahead, covered with spring grass that provided good grazing for the oxen. The children found the journey exciting, walking alongside the wagon, picking wildflowers, and watching for buffalo. But the monotony was already beginning to wear on the adults. The oxen walked at barely 2 miles per hour, and the wagon train rarely covered more than 15 miles in a day. The constant motion, the dust, and the noise of creaking wheels and lowing cattle became a relentless background to daily life. The first major landmark was Fort Kearny, established by the Army 3 years earlier to protect travelers on the Oregon Trail. The fort was a welcome sight after weeks of empty prairie, a symbol of American civilization in the wilderness. The Mitchell family, like the other travelers, took the opportunity to rest, repair their wagon, and buy supplies. But they also heard sobering news from other travelers. The trail ahead was more difficult than they had imagined, and not everyone who started the journey would complete it. As they left Fort Kearny, the landscape began to change. The prairie gave way to more broken country, with rocky outcroppings and sudden ravines that tested the skills of both drivers and oxen. The weather, too, became more challenging. Spring storms could turn the trail into a muddy morass, while sudden hail could damage wagon covers and spooked the animals. Sarah began to keep a detailed diary, recording the daily struggles and small triumphs of their journey. The first real test came at the Platte River. The crossing was dangerous, with quicksand and swift currents that could sweep away a loaded wagon in moments. Captain Morrison organized the crossing with military precision, but everyone knew that one mistake could be fatal. John drove their wagon into the water, feeling the current push against the wheels, while Sarah and the children held their breath. The oxen struggled against the current, their eyes wide with fear, but they made it across safely. Not everyone was so fortunate. They watched in horror as another family's wagon overturned, spilling its contents into the muddy water. The psychological toll of the journey was as challenging as the physical hardships, the constant uncertainty, the daily decisions that could mean life or death, and the relentless sameness of the trail began to wear on everyone's nerves. Arguments broke out over trivial matters, and the social fabric of the wagon train began to fray. Sarah found herself serving as peacemaker, using her natural diplomacy to smooth over disputes and maintain morale. The children adapted to trail life with the resilience of youth, but the journey was changing them too. Mary, the eldest, began to take on adult responsibilities, helping to care for Emma and assisting her mother with the endless tasks of camp life. Samuel became fascinated with the animals and the landscape, developing skills that would serve him well in his new home. Emma, too young to understand the full scope of their journey, found joy in the simple pleasures of life on the trail. The most feared section of the trail was the crossing of the Rocky Mountains. The wagon train reached the foothills in late July, and the temperature dropped noticeably as they climbed higher. The air became thin, making both humans and animals struggle for breath. The trail became treacherous, with steep grades, loose rock, and precipitous drops. John had to lock the wagon wheels on the downhill stretches, and Sarah walked alongside, ready to grab the children if the wagon began to slide. The mountain crossing claimed its victims. Disease was a constant companion on the trail, and the stress of the journey made everyone more susceptible to illness. Cholera was the most feared killer, striking without warning and often proving fatal within hours. The Mitchell family watched helplessly as their neighbors, the Johnsons, lost their youngest son to the disease. The burial was simple but heartbreaking, a small grave marked with a pile of stones, soon to be forgotten by all except the grieving family. Sarah's diary entries from this period reveal the emotional toll of the journey. "Another grave today," she wrote on July 28th. "Little Tommy Johnson, such a sweet boy. His mother hasn't spoken since the burial. I pray God will give her strength. We are all so tired, so worn down by this endless journey. But we must continue. We must reach Oregon." The descent from the mountains brought new challenges. The wagons, battered by months of rough travel, began to break down more frequently. John spent hours each day making repairs, using whatever materials he could find. The oxen, too, were showing the strain. Their hooves were worn down to the quick, and several had gone lame. The Mitchell family was forced to abandon some of their precious supplies to lighten the load. But there were moments of transcendent beauty that made the hardships bearable. The sight of the Columbia River, flowing west toward the Pacific, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. They had crossed the continental divide. They were truly heading toward their new home. The forests of the Pacific Northwest were unlike anything they had seen. Towering trees that seemed to touch the sky, crystal-clear streams, and mountain vistas that took their breath away. The final stretch of the journey was both the most beautiful and the most dangerous. The Columbia River provided a water route to the Willamette Valley, but the current was treacherous, and many wagons were damaged or lost in the rapids. The Mitchell family chose to take the Barlow Road, a newer route that avoided the worst of the river travel, but required another mountain crossing. It was a decision that would test their resolve one final time. The Barlow Road was barely a trail, carved through dense forest and over steep mountain passes. The wagons had to be lowered down cliff faces with ropes, and the oxen struggled to pull their loads up grades that seemed impossible to climb. Sarah's diary entry for September 20th captures the desperation of those final days. "We are all beyond exhaustion. The children cry constantly, and John hasn't slept in days. The wagon is held together with rope and prayer. But we can see the valley below us now. Oregon, our new home. We are so close." On October 2nd, 1847, after more than 4 months on the trail, the Mitchell family descended into the Willamette Valley. The sight that greeted them was everything they had dreamed of and more. The valley was a paradise of fertile soil, mild climate, and abundant timber. Other families who had made the journey in previous years had already established farms and were eager to help the newcomers get started. The Oregon Trail had extracted its price. The Mitchell family had left Missouri with 2,000 pounds of possessions and arrived in Oregon with barely 800. They had buried friends along the way and seen their wagon train shrink from 37 wagons to 29. John had lost 40 pounds, and Sarah's hair had gone completely gray. The children, too, bore the marks of the journey. They were tougher, more self-reliant, but also more serious than children should be. But they had also gained something invaluable. They had proven to themselves that they could endure anything, that they could overcome obstacles that would have defeated weaker souls. The skills they had learned on the trail, resourcefulness, courage, the ability to work together as a family, would serve them well in building their new life. The land they claimed in the Willamette Valley was everything they had hoped for. The soil was rich and fertile, the climate was mild, and timber was abundant for building. Within a year, they had constructed a log cabin, cleared 20 acres for farming, and planted their first crops. The children attended the region's first school, and Sarah helped establish the community's first church. The Mitchell family's story was replicated thousands of times during the Great Migration to Oregon. Between 1843 and 1869, more than 400,000 people made the journey west, seeking opportunity, adventure, and a chance to start over. They came from all walks of life, farmers like the Mitchells, merchants seeking new markets, skilled craftsmen, and families simply looking for a better life. The Oregon Trail was more than just a route across the continent. It was a symbol of the American spirit. It represented the belief that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things, that families could pull up stakes and start over, that the frontier offered unlimited possibilities for those brave enough to seize them. The trail was dangerous, demanding, and often deadly, but it was also a pathway to freedom and opportunity. The legacy of the Oregon Trail extends far beyond the individual families who made the journey. The settlers who reached Oregon helped establish American claims to the Pacific Northwest, contributing to the nation's expansion from sea to shining sea. They established communities, built schools and churches, and created the foundation for the modern states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. For the Mitchell family, the trail represented both an ending and a beginning. They had left behind the familiar world of their youth and embraced an uncertain future in the wilderness. But in doing so, they had participated in one of the greatest migrations in human history, a movement of people that would reshape a continent and define the character of a nation. Sarah's final diary entry, written on Christmas Day 1847, captures the complex emotions of their achievement. "1 year ago, we were planning our departure from Missouri. Today, we sit in our own cabin, on our own land, in Oregon. The journey nearly broke us, but it also made us stronger. We have learned that we can endure anything, that we can overcome any obstacle if we face it together as a family. This is the true spirit of America, not the land itself, but the courage to leave everything behind and start anew." As we reach the end of our journey through time, from the gladiatorial schools of ancient Rome to the soaring cathedrals of medieval Europe, and finally to the dusty trails of the American West, we see three powerful threads that bind these stories together across the centuries. The first thread is the indomitable human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. Spartacus, facing the might of the Roman Empire with nothing but his courage and the loyalty of his fellow slaves, showed us that even the most powerful systems can be challenged by those who refuse to accept their fate. The master builders of Gothic cathedrals, working with simple tools and incredible vision, proved that human creativity can literally reach toward heaven. The Mitchell family and thousands like them demonstrated that ordinary people can overcome extraordinary challenges when driven by hope and determination. The second thread is the power of leadership and vision to transform not just individual lives but entire civilizations. Spartacus transformed a slave revolt into a movement that shook the foundations of Roman society. The anonymous master builders of Chartres and other Gothic cathedrals created not just buildings but entirely new ways of understanding space, light, and the relationship between the earthly and the divine. The pioneers of the Oregon Trail, guided by experienced trail captains and their own inner compass, participated in one of the greatest migrations in human history. The third thread is the enduring human quest for freedom, whether from physical bondage, spiritual limitation, or geographic constraint. Each of our protagonists sought to break free from the boundaries that confined them and to create something new and better. Their struggles remind us that freedom is not a gift but an achievement, not a destination but a journey that each generation must undertake anew. These stories also reveal how individual courage can ripple through history, inspiring others across continents and centuries. The gladiators who followed Spartacus into battle, the craftsmen who labored for decades to complete Gothic cathedrals, and the families who risked everything on the Oregon Trail all understood that they were part of something larger than themselves. They were writing chapters in the ongoing story of human civilization, adding their own verses to the great epic of Western culture. What strikes us most powerfully about these three stories is how they demonstrate that the greatest achievements in human history have always required a combination of individual heroism and collective effort. Spartacus could not have shaken Rome without the support of thousands of followers. The Gothic cathedrals could not have been built without the collaboration of bishops and peasants, nobles and merchants, all working toward a common goal. The Oregon Trail could not have been conquered by individual families acting alone. It required the cooperation of entire wagon trains, the support of communities, and the shared knowledge of those who had gone before. As we reflect on these stories, we're reminded that history is not just about dates and events but about people, real human beings who faced choices, overcame obstacles, and shaped the world we've inherited. Their courage, creativity, and determination continue to inspire us today, reminding us that we too have the power to shape history through our own choices and actions. The gladiator who became a legend, the master builders who created architectural miracles, and the pioneers who conquered a continent. These are not just historical figures, but examples of what human beings can achieve when they refuse to accept limitations and dare to dream of something better. Their stories remind us that the greatest adventures in human history have always begun with a single step into the unknown, whether that step led out of a gladiatorial school, up the scaffolding of a cathedral, or onto the dusty trail heading west. In our modern world, we face our own challenges and opportunities. The spirit of Spartacus lives on in all those who fight for justice and freedom. The vision of the Gothic master builders continues to inspire those who seek to create beauty and meaning in our built environment. The courage of the Oregon Trail pioneers echoes in everyone who dares to leave the familiar behind and venture into new territories, whether geographical, intellectual, or spiritual. What would you have done if you had lived in these times? Would you have joined Spartacus's rebellion, knowing the risks? Would you have dedicated your life to building cathedrals that you might never see completed? Would you have packed up your family and headed west into the unknown, Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which of these stories resonates most with you and why. If you enjoyed this journey through Western history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. We'll be exploring more incredible stories from the past, from Viking raids to Renaissance art, from medieval warfare to the Age of Exploration. History is full of amazing stories waiting to be told, and we're here to bring them to life for you. Remember, the past is not just a collection of dusty facts and dates, it's a treasure trove of human experiences that can teach us about courage, creativity, and the endless potential of the human spirit. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the incredible stories that have shaped our world.